to me, honestly, that seems like we're going against Occam's razor in that we're multiplying the causes of saying like, okay, well, the only reason they're saying this is because they were on drugs, they were having like some
What's
sort of
more likely? Is it that they were on
however,
drugs, or is it a human being rose from the dead?
which is more likely.
Has a human being ever been documented recording, rising from the dead after being dead for 3 days, besides Jesus? How are you doing?
Oh, I'm doing great. How are you?
I'm doing just fine, thank you. And can you give us your name, please, and if your pronouns, if you prefer?
You can just call me fool and pronouns. I'm cool with any. So
Excellent. You said fool.
yeah, that's
All
fine.
right. You might regret that one later, but I will go with it.
No, I'm going with it on
All right.
purpose.
Alrighty. Well, I remember that you came into my YouTube comments. Now, if I recall, you seemed like you were coming in good faith. So um, I do want to take a little bit of a different approach than I usually take to like proper debates against people that I know already disagree with me on everything. If I recall, it was about the Redeem Zoomer video. Yes.
Yep, that's correct.
Okay. You want to get into it a little bit?
I'm hoping to come with good faith here too.
Sure. And did you want to get into a little bit of what you were specifically disagreeing with me on?
Sure. So
And
with
just for
you and
sorry,
with your
if I could set up the scene real quick. The Redeem Zoomer video, for those who don't know, was basically this guy named Redeem Zoomer who made a debunking atheists argument video. And most of the time I was just like, atheists don't make that argument. I'm not engaging with this. And I think that was basically the issue that Fool took with it. But I will let Fool explain.
no, that's pretty much correct. I mean, my only main issue with that was that some of the arguments that he makes, I do understand it's one of those situations where everyone kind of has their own beliefs, especially with something that's as broad as atheism, which, can just cover not believing in any God in particular. It's sort of different what everybody in particular has their reasons for looking at that. However, there are some arguments in there that he made, which I do think are relatively common atheist arguments, so I would have wanted some more engagement on those. However, I will also point out that some of the counter arguments he also made, I don't think were super duper strong,
Hmm.
kind of snippy and not really addressing. So it's not necessarily like I'm 100% on Redeemed side either on that one. I
Right.
just think, hopefully that we could have like a better good faith conversation back and forth on like the pros, the cons, the reasons for and not for believing, etc.
Okay. So it sounds like you thought that you did hear some arguments that he claimed atheists made, uh, that you hear atheists make as well that I did not address. So can you give me one, like just as an example?
Yeah, let me go ahead and check my
Because
notes.
yeah, sure, take your time. Because my perspective is, this man was clearly arguing with a guy in his head. Like these are arguments he's had in the shower one too many times, and he finally had to put it to a video to prove to people that he's just so damn smart and capable of taking down these uh, these uppity atheists who think that they just have all the answers. That's kind of the impression I got.
Okay, well, if that's your impression, I definitely can't say that I disagree with you on that
Okay,
one then.
okay, well, so we're off to a good start then.
Yeah, no, I definitely think that was a lot of the attitude that the video was made in, which is a lot of the attitude that honestly I don't like between atheist and theist discussions, is that oftentimes I think both sides kind of come at it with a I know I'm right and there's not really anything that you could teach me or tell to the situation, which
Mhm.
honestly I don't think is like the right attitude to take. I think like regardless of anybody's opinions
And
on
you said,
whatever
sorry,
matter,
you said that I
um,
was taking that attitude, or that he
I
was.
wouldn't say you were taking that attitude specifically. I just meant like
Okay.
theist versus atheist discussions in general, especially like after the sort of new atheist wave kind
Mhm.
of took on that highly self-assured, combative, I already know everything sort of mindset, which I really disagree with, and I don't think it's very conducive to discussion.
Okay, I can agree with that. I do think that there are there are uppity atheists who will like go on like they'll infiltrate Christian Reddits or whatever and be like, "Hey, you losers don't know anything. I know that God's not even real. You're all just living in a fantasy world." So I'm sure those guys do exist, but like not in any meaningful capacity in day-to-day life. And so like when I see these videos, I'm more inclined to just like brush it off to the side and be like, "Yeah, I'm sure that there's an atheist here and there who makes those arguments. I'm not one of them, and I don't care." Because what it says to me is that he's insecure about his own Christianity and his own faith. You know, like you're so insecure that you have to like take these guys seriously, and I just shrug it off. Like, who cares? Okay, if they're making dumb arguments that you know for a fact are dumb, like it's like okay, once again, if an atheist does make an argument about like, well, this book says this and that contradicts this thing in the other book, and I'm just like, I don't believe in God. Like that's my only point. Like I don't believe in God, so I would never make those arguments. And I just like it just let me not believe in God. That's it.
Gotcha. Okay, yeah, well, thanks for sharing that with me. I
Sure,
think I understand your position a lot more now.
sure.
I recently actually watched a debate between you and a Satanist minister, right?
Uh, that was not a debate. More like it was a. So that was just a discussion for sure
Conversation.
because I did really like that guy.
Yeah, he seemed pretty nice,
Yeah,
pretty friendly. So in that discussion, there were some like knockdown Christian questions. I wanted to more address those if you think that those are like your strongest objections, and we can see where we go on those.
strongest objections to Christianity in general.
Yeah.
Sure. Okay, we can do that.
Okay, cool. So one of the questions I heard was, by whom am I being saved? Is that correct?
Say that one more time. Sorry.
One of the knockout questions was, who's saving me? By whom am I being saved?
When you say knockout question, are you referring to like this is a gotcha or like a conversation ender?
I think that's what you guys said. But if that's not one of you think like the strongest objections, then we can just like toss it. Because really, I just want to like see what are your major concerns? What do you think is like the most important questions? And then we can just kind of go back and forth on them.
Well, my thing is, if you're a Christian and you are that upset that there are atheists who just don't believe in your way of thinking, then and that's why you're making these videos. I just think it's silly. No, there's no attack on Christianity. There's no people like there are again atheists here and there who try to get an own or dunk whatever. But like as an institution, Christianity is pretty damn safe, especially in America. And so I just roll my eyes at it. Now, as far as like my issues with Christianity itself, I do have some, as I have with like any faith. First of
Mhm.
all, just the idea of believing in a deity with no proof necessary. In fact, I wouldn't even say no proof necessary. I would say proof is declined. Like they don't need proof, and not only do they not need it, they don't want it because that's the point of faith, right? And so that's in general for religion a big problem to me. Now, I think that most people who are who believe in Christianity and Judaism, it's not that big of a concern because most people are pretty rationally thinking in everything else that's not religious. And so most people can distinguish, okay, this is my faith, this is what I believe, right? This is my irrational part, even if they don't phrase it like that. And then my rational brain is going to be for everything else, like discussions and how I view policy and everything else. But then there is this sect of Christians who don't do that. They literally just deny any evidence of anything, and so you get these. That's how you get anti-vaxxers. That's how you get people who are against vaccine. Or sorry, I said that masks is what I meant. People who you won't even take their kid to the doctor for cancer because they're like, oh, so convinced that like God will just save them from it. And so when that's the big danger to me. And once again, I don't think most people who are religious do that, but I do think there is an inherent danger in faith for that reason. That's my biggest problem.
Yeah, and yeah, I mean, that's definitely a good concern to have. I see faith a little bit differently.
Mhm.
I think, sort of like the Bible says, that faith is sort of the evidence of things hoped for and not yet seen. So I don't think it's necessary that you have to approach faith with irrationality. In fact, I think that there are major rational reasons to believe in a God. Things like, say, the Kalam cosmological argument, essentially that we can't have like an infinite regression of causes. So there has to be some sort of past eternal cause that created everything that there is sort of now, or what like I think Aristotle would call the prime mover. To me, those are like relatively good, strong arguments that I would think that there is something there. And I do think that there have been a lot of people in the past and some people now who do take a very rational, measured, and intelligent approach to their faith. So that's one of the things I wanted to bring up is that even though blind faith can be an issue, especially among a lot of Christians and a lot of American Christians in particular, I don't think it's one of those things that's a necessary part of Christianity. And I'd like to share that both with non believers, of course, like yourself, but also with other Christians as well, that we don't necessarily have to look at things simply through a purely like dogmatic lens.
Do you believe in God?
I do.
Okay. What is the logical like? Okay, so you said that the logical way that you believe in God is that there has to be like an ending at some point. There can't just be like an infinite number of causes. There has to be like a prime cause. Is that correct?
Yeah, I believe that there has to at some point be a prime cause or some sort of past eternal thing. That could be either the universe or it could be something that caused the universe.
So,
And at least from what I can see now, it seems that the universe definitely began at a certain point in time and then continued onward from there. So I would assume that whatever that past eternal thing is something that created the universe, not the universe itself.
but why isn't okay? So, are you Christian? Is that your faith, or what faith are you?
I'd say Christian is probably the closest. That
Okay,
sounds.
is there
I'm a
like a
little
specific?
idiosyncratic, but I follow Jesus Christ.
Fair enough. Okay, so Christian, we'll just say for the purposes of this conversation. So, what makes you Christian? Why are you so certain? Or I won't put words in your mouth. Sorry, I won't put ideas. I won't ascribe ideas to you just yet. But in my view, right, if you are saying yes, I am Christian, that means that you believe in the Christian God and in Jesus Christ, and that presumably that like Jesus died and rose again to save us. I'm assuming these are all things that you believe. Yes.
Yeah. Yep.
Okay.
Those are all things I believe.
So then what so if you truly do believe that Jesus died for 3 days and then rose again, where's the logic in that? Where's the proof? Like where's the evidence?
So the evidence for that one, I would say, seems strongest to me when we look at the testimony of the disciples.
Okay.
It's a situation where we can say now it's possible the disciples were all lying when they said that they like saw the risen Christ and saw him moving around and doing things. However, I think that's like unrealistic to me when we also know that they also went to their deaths in martyrdom, refusing to recant that position. So I
Okay,
feel
but
like if
but do
they were
we
just
have
lying for the attention, they would have just said, okay, yeah, I made it up, or okay, maybe I was wrong, or maybe I saw something.
sure,
But
but do
instead,
we
they
have
were
the
serious enough to say, like,
but do
I've
we
died
have the
for it.
original writings of the apostles? Did they write that? Like do we have documented evidence that they're the ones who wrote that?
I don't believe we have their original writings.
Right.
We do, however, have writings that are recorded from earlier traditions, and we also have the writings of Paul. I'm not sure if they're exactly contemporary or shortly after. However, the writings of Paul seem to corroborate what we find in the other writings that are attributed to the apostles. So it does seem like that is the case of what they were claiming at the time.
Why could it not be the case that like this great guy Jesus existed and he was a very progressive figure back then who like was actually did look out for the little guy, and he was so famous for his works that he became legend. I feel like that's if you're going by Occam's razor, that's why should I believe that like, oh, the apostles said this and then they said this to some other guy and then some other guy said it to some other guy until eventually it got to Paul who wrote it down. I feel like that's taken a few extra steps there that are unnecessary.
The reason I would say that I don't think that it's just a legend is that it seems that a lot of the reports of Jesus's events were, like I said, contemporaneous to the immediate time after his death. So it seems like I'd say there isn't enough time that we would normally expect to see a legendary development where things get bigger and bigger and bigger over time as people sort of spread the story along. It seems that the disciples very specifically were claiming that they observed this thing. So either they were kind of just making it up, or they could have had like a sort of group hallucination of the situation, but that's relatively uncommon and unexpected. Or, and this is, I think, what a lot of biblical scholars and historical scholars, even those who are atheists, say the disciples did seem to experience something. Even if they weren't necessarily
Yeah, but
correct, even if we
something
don't think
is
that
a
they rose from the dead, they experienced something.
but that's a big leap. You understand that? Like something, okay, they could have experienced drugs. Like they could have all been tripping out and they all just decided that Jesus rose from the dead after one of them said it. Like we don't know. And I'm not saying that to be mean. I'm not saying that to like shit on anybody's beliefs or traditions. I'm just saying that's a possibility. Do you agree that that is possible at least?
Only is possible. The only thing is that I don't know of any evidence that would
So
lead me to believe that's the
well,
case.
but for some reason you do have evidence to lead you to the belief that somebody rose from the dead after being dead for 3 days. Yes. Do you understand where
Yes.
this breaks
When
down?
we're talking about, oh, go ahead.
Well, I just asked. Do you understand where this logic breaks down?
I understand what you're saying. For me, what I'm saying is when we say, well, maybe they were all on drugs. To me, honestly, that seems like we're going against Occam's razor in that we're multiplying the causes of saying, like, okay, well, the only reason they're saying this is because they were on drugs, they were having like some
What's
sort of
more likely? Is
trip.
it that they were on
However,
drugs, or is it a human being rose from the dead?
which is more likely?
Have you has a human being ever been documented recording rising from the dead after being dead for 3 days besides Jesus?
Besides, no, no.
Okay, and then have how many documented cases do we have of people on hallucinogens experiencing otherworldly things?
I'd say probably a great amount.
A great amount. So if we're going by Occam's razor, I would say Occam's razor probably falls on my side. Yes.
Well, the issue that I take with that is that I don't have any specific reason to believe that there was any sort of drugs involved. So there's not like any sort of record of them taking drugs. I don't know of any like popular hallucinogens that were part of like religious ceremonies or Jewish culture or Roman culture at the time.
Right, sure,
So I
but
don't see a reason
but
to
you
say,
have to at
okay, they were all
least
on hallucinogens.
you have to admit that that's more likely than some dude rising from the dead. You have to admit that.
In a vacuum, yes, but in the
Exactly.
specific case, I don't think so.
Why not in this specific case? What's so special
Because,
about it?
like I said, in order to say, well, they were probably on drugs, at least for me, I would think, okay, but I would need some sort of evidence that they were on drugs, like a
Sure,
history of
and
drug
I'm not
use
discounting that.
or
And
like drugs
I'm
that are
not saying
popular in the time.
so I'm not saying that they were. And I'm not saying I have evidence that they were. I'm saying that if you have no evidence for either of these claims and I put them in front of you and I say which one's more likely, Occam's razor dictates that it's the drugs. So I don't need evidence to say to invoke Occam's razor and say it is far more likely that they were all tripping on shrooms than that. Because shrooms are a thing that have existed and do exist today, and so we know that people trip on shrooms and have otherworldly experiences, and so it is more likely that they somehow got their hands on shrooms and tripped out and all came to that conclusion rather than Jesus actually dying and rising from the dead. And that's just one example. I could give you a million different possibilities. Maybe they were tricking people. Maybe they were doing it for money. I don't know. So I'm not saying, again, I don't have evidence for that. But again, I just like this. There's no logical reason to assume that Jesus actually rose from the dead. There's zero logic to that to me.
Gotcha. Well, at least on the terms of like tricking people and doing it for money, because that's another like common hypothesis.
Hmm.
Again, I would say that I would be more likely to believe that in the case of they're living for the rest of their lives in like wealth or spending their money or even recanting their testimony. But if it was all just a con, again, just like speaking for myself, I would say it would be more likely if they were just running an elaborate con trying to get money out of people that when the Roman government came and said, hey, admit this is all fake or I'm going to torture you to death, they would probably just say, yeah, it's fake.
That's all good and fine. But again, you are trying to tell me that you believe a man rose from the dead after 3 days.
Yes. Or
Again,
right
so
now,
so so
actually,
that's
no.
so
More what I'm saying is that for now, at the very least, that I believe that the disciples believed that a man rose from the dead.
So do you believe that or not? Like for the
I
purposes, I know
believe it,
that you
yes, but
might
I'm
believe
saying what
something
we're
different.
trying to establish here
Okay.
is that I don't think that it was like a con that they were running or like a mass hallucination. I believe that
Okay,
they
but
believe
a
that
mass
the individual
hallucination can
actually
still
did that.
lead to somebody believing that something actually happened. Like for instance, my fiance, I don't know if she actually believes she saw a god in the shower or not, like a female
Mhm,
version of God in the shower. I don't know if she actually believes that. What I do know is that she says that she saw it, and I believe that she thinks that she saw it. But again, I can still say, well, Katie, that God was probably not real, and she knows that it's probably not real. Um, and if she chooses to believe that it was, then that's her choice, and I respect that. But I still can sit her down and say, well, Katie, you know that like shrooms do this to you. And so even if you had like an enlightening experience, it may have meant something to you, but that probably was not really what happened. You were probably just standing there in the shower, and she knows all of that. So I can ration with her, reason with her. Sorry. Um, but who I can't reason with is somebody who is like so convinced that a man. Here, let me just ask you this question: what can I say or show you to convince you that Jesus did not actually rise from the dead? Anything?
if you're talking like generally, I would say, for example, um, archaeological evidence that say we find like Jesus's body. Now that's obviously like one of the far, far out, like hardcore, definitely proven examples where it's like if we found Jesus's body, then I would have to say, okay, so he definitely didn't rise from the dead because that's his body right there. So we
Okay.
can see it. So we see that he didn't do it, right?
Do you not
Now,
think it's
obviously, that's
strange
not
that
going to
we
be something reasonable to have in the moment, but it is something that I think would be definitive proof.
do you, okay? So do you, in the absence of that, why could I not just say, well, then he didn't exist? If we don't have a body and we don't have any archaeological evidence that that person Jesus existed, why can I not just say he didn't exist? Because that would be the more reasonable conclusion to draw, rather than, or just that it's lost. By the way, that would be the more reasonable conclusion to draw, rather than he rose from the dead. That's why it's not there.
Sure. So for the case of him not existing, and this is something that again is brought up a few times called like Christ mythicism, this idea that Jesus was like a sort of made up figure. We have really good evidence, at least as good evidence as we have for almost any historical figure, that Jesus Christ did actually exist. He was spoken about not only by his disciples, but also referenced by other figures, though writing after the time. But there's at least as much evidence for Jesus as we have for figures like Julius Caesar, Alexander the Great. So if we assume that those figures exist, then we would also generally assume that Jesus probably existed.
Okay, that's fair. So I'll go ahead and take your word for it that we have evidence of Jesus Christ actually existing. I don't know the exact details of it. I'm sure it's out there. So I'll take your word for it. So
Yeah, it's
in
generally like historical records, writings, both of the disciples and of Romans at the time. We would generally say that those things attest to his existence.
Okay, so in the face of his existence, that he actually did exist, right? So in the face of that, why can I not just say that his body was lost to time? Like it's a body. It is a very big world with a lot of history, and so I just don't. I don't think it's good enough evidence for me to believe that he rose from the dead and then resurrected into heaven, or sorry, ascended into heaven, like his full body.
Mhm. So for that reason, I would say that if we were just looking at it for right now, I would say that that probably would make a lot of sense if we just say, well, his body just got lost.
Right,
Because it's, it's been like 2,000 years. So yeah,
right.
stuff gets lost, right? However, I would say from the attestation we have from the time, it would make less sense because both the Jewish authorities of the time and the Roman authorities were both not very big fans of like the Christ cult that was popping up. So they would most likely have had his body. There would be no reason for it to have gone missing. And according to
Okay,
the
what if they
record
burned it?
of the disciples, there were guards posted at the grave
What if they cremated
make
it?
sure that people didn't come in and steal it. So if they had the body, which they logically would have, they probably would have presented it at that time and said, "Look, Jesus obviously didn't rise from the grave. I have his body right here."
But what if they cremated it? What if they like threw it somewhere, or like I don't know, like there's all kinds of possibilities besides Jesus's body ascended into heaven.
It could have been cremated or thrown somewhere. However, I don't think we have the evidence that would point us to
Okay, but
believing that,
but
that
can
the
you
records both
acknowledge
of the Romans. Mhm.
can you acknowledge that that is far more likely than a man raising from the dead and going to heaven?
I'd say in a vacuum, yes, but I'd say the evidence we have of the situation, at the very least, when we're talking about either cremation or it just getting like thrown in a ditch somewhere, that the evidence that I think that we do have says that that probably didn't happen.
I don't. So what did happen instead then was that an entire man's body rose into heaven. Yes.
That's what I think happened. Now, we could say that some other naturalistic thing happened, like maybe there was like an alternate path into the tomb and someone snuck in through the back and stole his body that way.
Right.
I wouldn't ever be able to say that that didn't happen.
Right.
I just don't have necessarily a specific reason to think that it did, and that also the records that we have from the time, both of the Romans and the disciples, seem to say that he was buried in this specific tomb in accordance with Jewish customs. So he probably wouldn't have been tossed in a ditch and probably wouldn't have been cremated if we have multiple sides all recording that they had buried his body and anointed it and put it in this place.
My main concern right now, my main disagreement with this entire conversation is that you think that you have a rational belief that Jesus died and went to heaven. Yes? Like he rose from the dead and was and ascended to heaven full body. Yes? You still
I
there?
think I have
Oh, sorry.
rational reasons to believe that. I'd say, yeah. I don't know if I'd say it's a rational belief. I'm not necessarily
have
sure,
you
but
ever
yeah.
seen another example of that in human history ever?
I'd say no. I haven't seen
Okay, well
another
then
one
what
yet.
then I don't understand what purpose you have for believing that because like you said, somebody could have just taken his body and stolen it. So I feel like that's way more likely. Like I can give you a thousand more likely examples. And I know that you say we don't have evidence for this, we don't have evidence for that. We don't have evidence that he rose into heaven either, except for hearsay. It's all just hearsay. And again, that just sounds like legend stuff to me.
Well, I'd say it's probably not hearsay based off of the fact that, at least according to the best records that we have, it seems that that was the attestation of the disciples and that
And,
they were
and
saying
they
that they
and
saw
and they
him
were all
direct.
his fanboys. I'm sorry, they were like Jesus's fanboys. So of course they're going to say that.
I don't think that's the case because there were other messiahs at the time who also were executed by the Roman government, and there weren't widespread claims that those people had risen from the grave and floated into heaven. So there were
Okay,
other
well
people with
then
their own fanboys
their
who didn't make
apostles should have
it.
tried harder.
Maybe, but at the
But do you
very
see what
least,
I'm
I'd say
saying
like
here?
this does seem like something that's different, though. I see what you're saying
Okay.
100% in that
Okay.
if if I can restate it and you can tell me if I'm on base here, you're simply saying, "Hey, look, we have no other examples of anybody ever rising from the grave. So because that would be like a unique event, we
A
should naturally
supernatural one with
conclude
no
that it's
scientific
no."
explanation.
Yeah, so we should naturally conclude that that's probably at most generous, the least likely possible event to happen.
Yes,
Is
and
that
let
roughly
me
what you're saying?
yes, and if you would like to respond, you can, but I also have another question for you.
Sure, go ahead.
Okay. Why aren't scientists fervently studying how he was resurrected so they can
I
use it in
would
medical
say
science?
one, we probably wouldn't because any useful data that we could probably scientifically gather from that is beyond our scope. For example, it happened that like 2000 years ago, so there doesn't seem to be any sort of like contemporaneous people that we can interview on it. We only have the records, and according even to the resurrection and assuming the resurrection happened, there isn't a body there. So there's not really anything that we can run experiments or tests
Sure, but
on.
why
That being
so
the case,
when
this
we
is sort of
sorry, I don't mean to cut you off, but I do want to
oh
make
god.
sure that so when we look at the pyramids, we think it's often said that like we don't know how they built it, right? We don't know why they're still standing or how it's so good, whatever. But like scientists are fervently studying, like we have physical evidence there to study this pyramid and how they built it and try to copy what they're doing. scientists, even though they don't know how it was built, they don't just throw their hands up and say, "Oh, well, it is what it is. It's there. It's fine." No, they're like actively pursuing this knowledge of like, okay, how did this happen? Like, what did they use? Like they're breaking it down into its components. They're trying to replicate it. They that's the big thing is they try to replicate it. I've never heard of cases. Now there probably are some horrific cases here and there, but like I just don't hear that many contemporary cases of scientists attempting to resurrect dead bodies. I think they'd be trying it all the time if they actually believed it were possible. I mean, do you believe it's possible?
I think that would do I think it's possible to resurrect people?
Yeah.
I think that we started to get into a weird area where we have to discuss what we kind of mean by resurrect. In that, for the easiest cases where we say, can we like stop somebody's heart and restart it? That seems like
Okay, they're dead for
so
three
easy now that it's
days. They're
practically
dead for three
mundane. But
days.
when we get to,
They're dead for 3 days and they've been in a tomb with no food or water.
yeah, is it possible?
Is it possible?
I really have, you're talking scientifically, correct?
At all? Is it possible? If it's not scientifically possible, it may as well not be possible at all.
I don't know if I'd agree with that, but just keeping on track, I would say I really don't know. Partly because what's scientifically possible for us now was also incomprehensible in the past. So I really have no idea if there would be some sort of development or some sort of method that could raise like 3 day old, 5 day old, year old bodies from the grave. I would just be speculating.
Right. So then the process through which this happened, because if I would hope that you agree with me that some kind of like assuming that Jesus actually did come back from the dead and rose into heaven with his whole body intact, there is some kind of physical element there, some kind of real tangible process that took place that made that possible that we should be able to replicate at some point. Do you believe that or not?
I don't think that that follows.
With no
Just
matter
because
how many scientific advancements we have, you don't think we can ever replicate that?
Well, I'm saying the specific process by which Jesus rose from the dead um, presupposes like supernatural events. And
Exactly.
because
So they're not
specifically science is,
scientifically like possible if they're
yeah,
supernatural.
it's not scientific, it's supernatural.
Right.
However, simply because something's not scientific, I don't think is equivalent to saying that it does not exist.
But
Because science is very specifically,
by believing in something in supernatural, you by necessity are believing in something what is it irrationally, because there's no evidence for it happening, or like the evidence that we do have for it happening is not it's not substantial because it's all hearsay. It's all hearsay. It's legends passed down from yonder day. Okay, and you can say that we have this and that and the other thing, and the apostles would never lie and whatever. And I'm not trying to bash your religious beliefs, because once again, like, I have Christian friends and they're all very nice people and whatever. All I'm trying to say is this is not rational. It's not. It's not
so
based on any
I
scientific
think that
reality. It's not like there's no step A to step B for how this happens. All I'm saying is that it's not, religious beliefs are typically not rational.
Gotcha. So for that, I would say that I think there's a conflation between what is scientific and what is rational. Science does come to rational conclusions, but science is not like coterminal with rationality. It's just one method of rationality, specifically like
The
logical
scientific method.
empiricism. Yeah, the scientific method of testing things, creating hypothesis, testing that hypothesis, and specifically creating repeatable events that we can use to make predictions about the future. But science is very, very particularly and like specifically focused on the natural world. So when we're talking about things that aren't necessarily like natural or empirical, I don't think that science would necessarily be the best method. In the same way that we can't really scientifically prove Alexander the Great was a real person, because there's not really any sort of repeatable
We can
experiments that
well
could
we can't
be
prove,
run to
but the,
prove
the
that we
point
could.
isn't to scientifically prove anything. In science, it's disproving. So if you can disprove something, then it is considered scientific. We have a lot of evidence that Julius Caesar was a real person who existed. I think there are like land maps from back in the day. There's all kinds of writing on them. I don't know the details, but what I do know is that we learned about him in school, and that there is quite a bit of evidence that he did in fact exist. I've heard that, like, We have evidence that
Evidence is
there
the
was somebody
scientific,
called
right?
Jesus back then who existed, or there were several people called Jesus. I don't know, but
Mm,
I'm willing to believe that there was a guy named Jesus who did things that might have seemed supernatural at the time. But first of all, I don't even think that's the important part of Jesus. I don't think the important part of Jesus is that he, made water into wine, or brought himself back to life, or healed the blind. Even I don't think any of that is the important part. The important part of Jesus is what he represents. He represents unconditional love for your fellow man, and doing the right thing, and always trying to give what you can, and while taking what you need. You know what I mean? Like, these are the principles that I would expect from a good Christian. And so it wouldn't, if I ask a Christian, did Jesus exist? What I would like to hear is, it doesn't matter, because Jesus is an ideal. Okay. And I would love to see more Christians take this ideal and run with it, rather than be like, no, 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 I promise. But man, listen, this guy literally died and then came back to life 3 days later, and then he rose into heaven. I didn't see it happen. Nobody saw it happen except for the apostles, and they didn't even say that it happened. It was just people that knew them said it happened, and they swear that it happened, bro. I don't care. None of that matters. The only reason we're having this conversation, once again, is to discuss the rationality of it. There's no rationality to, and I'm sorry I'm getting, loud, but like, I am passionate
right.
about this. There's no rationality to believing that, first of all. And then second of all, it doesn't matter anyway, because I care more about the Christian ideal. And I see that lost in a lot of modern day Christians, and that's what I don't like.
Got you. So if I can get a little time, I'd like to respond to like both of the sides of those
Of
points.
course. Yeah, take your time.
Um,
I talked for a long
yeah,
time.
no problem. Hey, it's your show. So you can talk
I
for however
appreciate
long
it.
you
Go
want,
ahead.
right?
Yeah, go ahead.
Um, so for the first part, I would say that I think one, obviously, I do think that there are rational reasons to believe that go beyond the scientific, but let's not like double back onto that because obviously it's a whole nother side of the conversation. I do
Sure.
think Jesus rose, and I do think it's at least important because it rephrases and contextualizes a lot of the claims that he made. And also, generally, I think just looking for truth is just important, if not at least just to me. However, I do have to agree with you in that I do think that sometimes there has been a loss of focus on living out the pattern of Jesus's life, following his example, especially in modern Christianity and especially in modern Christianity in America. When we look at people like Matt Walsh, who's very, very like ardent in proclaiming that he's a Christian and that he loves Christian values, but really, not to knock him because I'm not perfect either, right? But when we look at him, would we say like, oh yeah, if Jesus was alive today, he'd definitely be just like Matt Walsh? I mean, besides having like a beard, I don't see how, right?
I think Matt
Um,
Walsh is
yeah.
far closer to the Antichrist, to be honest.
Honestly, I have called him an antichrist once
Oh,
or
there we
twice
go
myself,
then.
but but that's
Glad
just
we agree
because,
on that.
yeah, in literal ways, his values, his persona sort of exists like in direct opposition of everything that Jesus advised and stood for, and also that he claims that that's like what Christ would have wanted, even though like we can see that it's almost the exact opposite.
Yep.
I do think that there needs to be a much, much stronger focus on following Christ's example, on living the what Christians call like the Christ life. Um, and yeah, I think that for a lot of people, the rise of like the moral majority in the Reagan era has been a real double-edged sword. Because, yeah, I mean, Christians are part of this country too, a big part. They deserve to have their political views represented, et cetera, et cetera. But also, for now, a lot of Christianity has kind of become less a religion or a lifestyle and more like a political party. Which I feel, again, when we just look at the example of Christ, he said like specifically and exactly that his kingdom is not a kingdom of this world and give unto Kaiser what is Kaiser's and give unto God's what is God. It seems like he was not very focused on grabbing the levers of political power to make sure that things went the way that he wanted to, even though that was what was expected of many Jewish messiahs of that day. He was much, much more focused on what he called like the kingdom of God, of like transforming yourself and living like a good life in line with morality and goodness and hope and love. So, yeah, I think that you're definitely right to be frustrated with that. I'm frustrated too. I
Well, that's
feel
good.
like when somebody who's like an outcast or impoverished hears that there's a radical Christian on the way, they should be like happy. And right now, that's definitely not the case, right? So,
Right.
yeah, there's definitely a lot of issues that every Christian, including me, needs to like really work on correcting in that way.
Okay. I think we're on the same page with that at least. I think the main contention here is the rationality of the whole thing. But if I can just get one uh I guess I hate saying admission, but if I could just get one statement out of you as to whether like it's possible that you're wrong, because I another problem that I have with Christians is how certain they are. They're like, no, I 1,000% believe that Jesus was a real guy, one guy who existed, and he died, and he rose from the dead 3 days later, and he rose up to heaven, and that's how he saved the world. And they're fervent. They refuse to say that that's even remotely not possible. And that's part of the reason that I just find them, I find Christians, I should say, sorry, religious fundamentalists, Christians, Islamists, even Jewish people included, like I find them insufferable sometimes, because if you can convince somebody that easily to believe something with no evidence, like or very sorry, with no scientifically sound evidence, I should say, that something is real, you could do anything with them, and people have. People have taken advantage of religious institutions throughout history, something I'm sure you know well. And so if
Yeah,
I could
no,
just get like
100%.
sort of a statement from you saying that, like, like at least that you acknowledge that it's possible that these things aren't real, or that, like, it's completely possible that you're wrong about Jesus rising from the dead and going to heaven. That's more comfortable for me, because at least then I can peg you as somebody that I can talk to and reason with. You know what I mean?
Yeah, 100%. Unfortunately, Alec, I'm kind of a genius, so it's not really possible for me to be wrong about anything.
Uh-huh.
So yeah, no, but yeah, there's a reason that I said to call me fool is that yeah, it's definitely possible that I'm wrong.
Okay.
In fact, I think I'd go a little bit further and say even if Jesus rose from the dead and Christianity is true, I'm almost positive that if we all get to heaven, I'm probably going to be wrong about like 80, 90% being generous of things.
Okay.
Because truth is something that's much, much larger than I think any one person, especially me, can just say, oh, well, I've grasped it. I know, I'm right. I'm perfect. And I think in a lot of ways, when you speak about the downfalls of faith, I definitely hear what you're saying, but I think in its best forms, that faith is kind of about addressing that and saying, hey, look, we don't have all the answers. We don't know everything is right. Even Paul in the Bible says, what we see now, we see dimly as through a glass. So, yeah, it's not necessarily like, oh, well, I know I definitely can't be wrong about anything. I can definitely be wrong about everything, and I'm probably wrong about most things.
Mhm.
I just believe the things that I do because I would think, and I hope that you at least could acknowledge that I at least believe that I have good reasons to think those things. And if I stop thinking that I have good reasons to believe those things, then I'll believe something else.
I would. I don't mean to. I'm not trying to be bad faith here. I think that you think that you have good reason to believe those things. I personally don't. Like, I think, if I did think that you had good reason to believe those things, then I would also believe those things. Does that make sense? So, like, I don't personally
I
believe that you have good.
100%
Yeah.
acknowledge that, just that I do think that I have
Right. Right.
good
Right.
reason to believe those
Right.
things. Now you can obviously say, because again, you can always say, "Hey, so long as you don't think I'm being bad faith, or that I'm just, like, completely stubborn,
Mhm.
okay, well, probably what you're saying seems to make sense to you, even if it doesn't necessarily make sense to me."
Right. Right. Um. Okay. I guess if you want to keep going about, like, whether or not this is rational, I still disagree with you on that. But I don't think that, like, you know, I guess I'm using the meter stick of the last guy debated, but oh my god. But I don't think that you're a bad guy. You sound like you got a good head on your shoulders. Like I said, my only disagreement, and I'm glad that you agreed to come on here, by the way. Like I said, I did find your comment good faith. Sometimes I'll reply to
I'm
people who are
glad to be
just
here.
Of course, yeah. Sometimes I'll reply to people who are just being shitheads, and I know they're gonna come on stream and be shitheads, and that's why I go for them. But I did go after you because not after you. I commented and replied to you because I thought that it was good faith, and I wanted to have a good conversation about it, which I think that we have had. I mean, is there anything else that you wanted to touch on? Because I know that like we got into a little bit into the weeds about like the specifics of whether or not it's even rational to be religious or whatever. But I know that there might have been some other atheist arguments that maybe you wanted to touch on, or what? Basically, I'm asking: is there anything else that we didn't talk about that you would like to?
I suppose I'm pretty good. I would just want to wrap up in saying one, and again, I take your points 100% and I understand them.
Mhm.
I do think that there are other rational paths to knowledge besides science. So that's why when you have your objections that these beliefs aren't scientific, I agree 100%. I just also think that science is not the correct domain to be looking at these claims through. Now, obviously, going into that would be a whole nother thing, which I assume we probably don't have time for, so I'll just leave that there. And before I go, I just want to let everybody know that Jesus loves you and you specifically, not just you as mankind in general. And regardless of like what you think, feel, or believe, you are important and you are special and you are loved.
Great, and I also want to say I do think religion can be used for good. I think that I've talked to religious people. Obviously, there are religious people out there who stand by their moral convictions. They say Jesus loves you, regardless of whether you're gay, trans, whatever. I talk pretty regularly about like the Jesuits, particularly. I'm fairly sure. I keep telling myself I'm going to double check this, but I'm fairly sure they had pretty good politics back in the day and still do. So, obviously there are religious institutions and sects that are uh, quite beneficial to have around. I can get into the weeds about like whether I believe the religious aspect of that is the important part, but nonetheless, being religious and being a good person are not mutually exclusive. It's just that religion has often been used, as you know, as a weapon um, against minority groups, especially gay and trans people. And so sometimes I get a little bit militant, but I do understand that uh, there are good religious people out there, and you seem like one of them. So I appreciate you coming on today.
I appreciate being here, and I just want to say, similarly, hey, there is, even from a religious perspective, I think, an importance to having skepticism, an importance to having people ask questions. When people don't ask questions, when they don't investigate, that's when we get like corrupt institutions that just feel like they can do whatever they want to and start twisting the words of God to just mean whatever it's convenient for them to mean to oppress the people that they hate for one reason or another, or to enrich themselves with things that they don't deserve. So it's important to question, keep questioning, keep investigating. I just hope everyone keeps an open mind and good faith, and I think that you have an open mind and good faith. So
All right, excellent. Well, thanks again for coming on. I really appreciate it.
thank you. Have a great day.
You as well. Thanks. Bye. All right, I think that was a pretty solid discussion. We kind of cut short like the whole whether or not religion is rational thing. Um, I just like I don't know how much I care about it. My like I said, my biggest thing is not even whether or not being religious is rational. I don't think that it is, but I'm willing to see it grow out on that as long as you're not an asshole. you know, I'm willing to like let you have that. I don't think that I'm better than anybody for not being religious, for not believing in God or anything like that. For people who are watching this, and expecting some like mega mind r/slash atheist takes or whatever, that's not me. You know, my only thing is, again, when people are just so damn sure about the whole thing. So as long as you can admit, well, there's a possibility that I'm wrong. There are things that you could show me that would prove me wrong, and I would take it, at face value. Or at the very least, even if you do believe that you're completely correct 100%, be a good person. Like just don't be an asshole, please. Just don't be an asshole. That's my only uh request, I guess. As long as you're not an asshole, you can believe whatever you want. But if you're an asshole, uh the only thing that you get to believe is in uh, that I don't like you, because that's a true belief. Hey, thanks for watching. If you enjoyed the video, please be sure to hit the like button, subscribe if you want to see more, hit the notification bell to be notified when I upload. If you enjoy my content, you enjoy what I do, I really appreciate any financial help that I can get. Go to youtube.com/AlecGunterTTV/join. You got some awesome benefits, such as seeing early videos, awesome emotes that you can use in the comments of YouTube videos, and a sweet badge next to your name. So if that sounds interesting to you, I'd really appreciate if you join. It is cheaper than the cost of a blowjob from your mom. So with all that being said, thank you again for watching, and I'll see you all in the next video.